Does anybody really like shopping for rugs? Going into some huge store with can't really see them and they can be so expensive? Well, Revival Rugs was created to disrupt the rug industry, which is filled with notoriously overpriced pieces or low-quality rugs that won't even last a season. Revival believes that rugs are works of art, and they have the power to transform a space. They blend quality materials with traditional and modern weaving techniques to make the best rugs around. Revival's a global company with teams in the U.S. as well as weaving regions in India, Turkey, Morocco. They make rugs responsibly in small batches with tried and true techniques and long-lasting materials. Also, they have a washable rug collection, which is actually their most popular category of rugs. They are genuinely washable rugs, combining true washability with the look and feel of a real rug, so you don't have to sacrifice style for convenience. I recently purchased an incredibly beautiful 8x10 rug. It looks fabulous in my dining room. And you know, my son just bought a house and they got one for their bedroom. They brought it into their new house and it just totally transformed the space. So visit revivalrugs.com/fluster and use code FLUSTER20 for 20% off your first order. Once again, that's revivalrugs.com/fluster and use code FLUSTER20. One more time, revivalrugs.com/FLUSTER with code FLUSTER20 to save 20% off. Whenever somebody's afraid of something, they're overestimating the problem and underestimating their resources to deal with it. So you really want to normalize that this is a thing that human beings go through, and you want to put it in the context of this is how anxiety makes things into an emergency. This is how anxiety makes this a problem that you can't handle. This is how anxiety makes something so big and so powerful that you rearrange your life in order to avoid it.
Welcome to Season 7 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we'll talk about managing anxiety and all the other emotions too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious. I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author. I've been a therapist for 35 years. Parenting can be a Flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll tell you what to do and what to say.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Ed.
How are you?
Pretty good. I was on a vacation recently.
Yes.
And I will tell you, I just highly endorse going away and completely unplugging for a week. So we were in the mountains of Arizona down by the Mexican border. And boy, it was good in so many ways. So,
that's great.
Yeah. A funny thing did happen on one of our flights. So I'm sitting in my seat. I got seated and then people are filing by, as you know, because you're on planes all the time too. And this little girl walks by. She's like cute as a button. She's holding her little stuffy and she walks by. She's got a really serious look at her face and she's just repeating to herself, I will be safe. I will be safe. I will be safe. Oh my God. I talk a lot about the word safe and how with kids, when parents use that word, it often has the opposite effect. Everything is safe. You'll be safe. And there's nothing is going to go wrong. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this poor little kid. I mean, she was just like so serious and just focused on walking down that aisle.
What might the parents have done in a positive respect in the days prior to ease her with that anxiety?
Well, I'm guessing, like maybe she was worried about flying and maybe she wasn't. If she is worried about flying, you have to think, okay, where did that come from? And I think probably there was a lot of safety chatter. Like there was a lot of talk about we're going to be safe and planes stay in the air and the pilot knows exactly what the pilot is doing. And when we get to the airport, everything's going to be fine.
The odds are in your favor.
Right. There's just going to be a lot of chat about that. You know, you sort of think about if every time your child is eating something, you're like, you know how to chew. You won't choke. Everything is going to be fine. All of that safety chatter has the opposite effect of just being like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. This is dangerous.
Sure.
Yeah. So you just want to be, if a kid says, oh, I'm afraid to fly in a plane, you say, oh, well, I get that, right? You've never flown on a plane before. And actually, there was a little 3-year-old sitting in front of me with his mom on one of the flights. And he was a little nervous because we were taking off. And I don't know that he'd been on a plane before. And the mom said to him, yeah, I get a little nervous when a plane takes off too. And then we get up in the air and it sort of settles out. And she was just very nonchalant about it. And there wasn't this intensity of airplanes are safe. We won't die. It was just an interesting contrast of how we talk to kids about things.
I was listening to a podcast, What Now, with Trevor Noah.
Yeah, I like Trevor Noah.
Yes, he was on The Daily Show for many years. And his guest was a guy that we've talked about on this podcast, Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. And I just give that a shout out. There was a corollary to many of the things that you have discussed, particularly he's written a book, The Anxious Generation, and he talks a lot about children and cell phones. And it was a great conversation that brought up a few things that even though you and I have talked about it at length and everyone's very cognizant of impact of phones, there was some new information. I just throw that out there as something that other people can listen to.
Yeah, he's been really making the rounds.
He has.
And actually, I saw a headline recently that said, and then I read the article, and the headline was a little bit more clickbaity than the article itself, but it said that New Hampshire was on the verge of passing one of the strictest phone bans, school phone bans in the country. And I thought, oh God, what are they up to? Because you never know with New Hampshire, it can go either way. But what they were passing is a state bell-to-bell no phone policy. The controversy is whether or not it's a state law or whether or not local boards of education have control over what works in any one given town or school district. And people have arguments for and against. I thought, well, a bell-to-bell no phone policy doesn't sound all that controversial to me, but I think it was the issue of local versus state control.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens. But the pendulum is definitely swinging toward this idea of what are kids missing when they're on their phones? What are the experiences that they're not having? And I know that's a lot of what Jonathan Haidt talks about. And I had done that workshop with Jean Twenge, who's a researcher on this very topic. And there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying to our kids a fact that I had read elsewhere. If you, say, are 13, which our son is, by the time you are 73, if you were to have spent 2 hours a day on your phone, which is not an unreasonable amount, many people to spend on their phone, that's 43,800 hours, which equates precisely to 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Of 24-hour blocks. And of course, you're sleeping during a portion of that time. So it's more like 7.5 years of your waking life on your phone.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And I think also that one of the things that people are saying to me as we're moving into the summer and kids are out of school is that parents feel like they are in a constant battle with screens with their kids.
Yes, the great Jim Gaffigan said that his primary role as a parent is taking away screens.
Yeah. And I think that so many parents feel that way. And as they're starting the summer, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to be in this battle. I'm just going to be fighting against this day after day after day after day.
Robin and I are taking our 2 kids on a long trip this summer, and our kids are not yet aware that they are not going to be bringing their phones.
Wow. When are you going to tell them?
Well, probably in the days coming up to it.
And are you guys bringing your phones?
We are only because of our business, our travel business, but we are attempting to be very mindful of minimal usage.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've done plenty of episodes on this, but it's just interesting at the beginning of the summer season. The issue continues to just be such a prominent one for families, for sure.
So let's chat today about emetophobia.
Yes. Yeah, that's a hard right turn.
What percentage of our listeners do you think know exactly what one means when they say, let's chat about emetophobia?
Probably not very many, but when I say this next sentence, everybody will know exactly what we're talking about. We're going to talk about vomit. We're going to talk about the fear of vomiting, and it's called emetophobia. It's not hugely uncommon. Maybe 6 to 7% of kids have emetophobia. I didn't realize this as a stat, but it certainly bears out in my experience, in my practice. It is primarily girls that struggle with this. So I was thinking about all the kids that I've treated with this fear of vomiting, and I cannot think of one boy. And I have several now, and they are girls. So it's a pretty interesting gender split, and there's really not any explanation for why. So emetophobia is an intense fear of vomiting, and the way that we classify it as a disorder, as a problem, is the same way we classify a lot of the other anxiety issues, is that it really interferes with your functioning. I say to kids all the time, of course you don't like to throw up. Nobody likes to throw up. If you liked to throw up, that would be a problem. It's the same with needle phobia. Kids are like, I hate shots. Well, good. I'm glad you don't like getting stuck with a needle. The problem is that with emetophobia, there are many, many behaviors that then kids and families adopt because the goal of the disorder is to never throw up. And that's a really hard thing to pull off. It's sort of like when we talk about social anxiety, if the goal is to never feel embarrassed, that's hard to pull off. If you're a perfectionist, the goal is to never make a mistake, that's hard to pull off. When you get so focused on trying to prevent something that is actually a very common human experience, boy, does it take control. And that's what we have to address.
And we had a listener who actually wrote in on this very topic. So I will read the question that we received. My 11-year-old daughter has emetophobia. I've taken your trainings and listened to your podcast regularly. Thank you for all you do. We're facing a tough challenge right now. Her doctor is needing her to gain weight, but when she's anxious, she can't eat. She refuses lunch at school, and now during summer camp, she goes 7 hours without eating. She says it feels like her stomach shuts down and she gags on food. She's currently in therapy and working on exposures, but we haven't seen much progress. I would be so grateful for any advice or tips you might have.
Okay, so this is a really typical question because whenever eating is an issue, whenever you worry about your child getting nutrition that they need, whenever they're losing weight, whenever they're going to school and not eating, whenever they're going for hours and hours and hours, parents get concerned. And then the pediatrician is saying she's not gaining weight and that's going to impact her growth and her development. So there's a real sense of panic whenever food is involved for a lot of reasons. So kids don't eat for many reasons. So sometimes they don't eat because they are very picky eaters. And we did a episode on that. So it's a texture issue or they don't like smells or taste. They're just very sensitive. So we did an episode on that. You can go back and listen to that. Sometimes kids don't eat because, as is part of this question, when you're anxious, one of the things that happens is that your digestive system shuts down. And so it's not really in the receiving mode. You lose your appetite. And I think many of us can relate to that when you're anxious, you don't eat. That certainly happens to me. I am somebody who, when I am anxious about something, my appetite is zippo. And so that happens too. Sometimes kids don't eat because they develop eating disorder or body issues. So they're worried about gaining weight. They're worried about being fat. So when a child develops an eating disorder, that is a very serious issue because unfortunately, it's one of the disorders that has the highest rate of fatality in young people. And then there's ARFID. There's something called ARFID, which is a restrictive eating disorder. That is kind of a new term that people new to sort of the public awareness, and that's restrictive eating. They're not restricting their eating because they're worried about getting fat or they're worried about their body image. It's because they have difficulty with certain types of food. They don't like flavors. And sometimes it moves into this emetophobia, which is they're afraid to throw up. So what happens is that they start putting in place all sorts of behaviors, safety behaviors, we call them, because the goal is to not throw up. So it's very OCD-ish. And a lot of people who treat emetophobia, they say it's really not very different than other obsessive compulsive behavior. because you have this fear, you have this obsessive thought, what if I throw up? What if I throw up? What if I throw up? And then you start doing these behaviors, which are very much compulsions, to try and prevent that from happening. And it impacts where kids go. It impacts when they'll eat, what they'll eat. It impacts their social relationships. Sometimes kids are afraid of throwing up because it's going to be embarrassing. So their fear is, what if I'm out in the world? What if I'm on a field trip? What if I'm at school and I vomit? That would just be so humiliating. So they start restricting where they go. Sometimes they're just very, very scared, and this is quite common, very, very scared of the vomiting process. Maybe they had a bad stomach flu, or they heard somebody or saw somebody throw up, and it just looks like a horrible experience to have. And honestly, it is a horrible experience to have, right? I mean, nobody wants to get the stomach bug and barf their brains out. And so they become more and more restrictive about what they do, how they respond to things. Sometimes they'll limit their foods to only 1 or 2 foods. The thing that makes it really OCD-ish is they say things like, and I've had this with plenty of my clients, I was wearing a pink t-shirt the last time that I threw up, so I'm not going to wear a pink t-shirt. I had my hair in braids the last time that I threw up, so I'm not going to wear my hair in braids. I had one girl who threw up after the Super Bowl one year, and so she forever said, I'm never going to watch another football game because I might throw up. So it becomes kind of that superstitious thing.
So let's take a quick break, Lynn, and then when we come back, you can help with what parents are to do about this.
All right. I love my kitty. I do everything I can to help make sure that she's healthy. We give her good food. We have all sorts of toys. And of course, using Pretty Litter, that's something that's a total game changer. Pretty Litter helps monitor your cat's health. So it detects abnormalities in your cat's urine by testing acidity and alkaline levels and showing the visible presence of blood. Pretty Litter ships free right to my door. It's non-toxic, pet safe, and household friendly. Plus, it's low dust, it controls odors, and lasts up to 1 month. If you love your kitty like I do, if you want to take care of your kitty's health, get Pretty Litter. Right now, you can save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy at prettylitter.com/flusterclux. That's prettylitter.com/flusterclux to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. prettylitter.com/Flusterclux. Pretty Litter cannot detect every feline health issue or diagnose diseases. A diagnosis can only come from a licensed veterinarian. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. Summer's here. Time to add some new things to your closet. Time to do a little refresh. But I don't want to waste money. Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. For example, 100% European linen shorts, dresses from $30, swimwear, Italian leather platform sandals. The best part, everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. So by working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. I love ordering from Quince. I love their clothes. The t-shirts that I've ordered from Quince, I was just wearing one yesterday, V-neck, beautiful fabric. It'll hold up for the whole summer. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/fluster for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/fluster to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/fluster. Hey, I just got my new Lisa mattress, and I haven't had a new mattress in a long time, but I've definitely slept on great mattresses, and this is a great mattress. I needed a new one, and boy, it is making such a difference. Lisa has several different mattresses and models to choose from. They're each designed for specific sleep positions and feel preferences. They use the highest quality materials. Delivery is free. Returns are easy. You have 100 nights to try out your mattress. I didn't need 100 nights. I needed one night. I mean, really, such a good quality sleep. So go to lisa.com for 30% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code Flusterclux. That's exclusive for our listeners. That's LEESA.com, promo code Flusterclux for 30% off mattresses plus an extra $50 off. Lisa.com, promo code Flusterclux. Remember, no matter who you are, there's a Lisa just for you. Okay, we're back. Okay, as you're dealing with this as a parent, there are a few things, there are a few really major do's and don'ts. So one of the do's is I would recommend getting help for this sooner rather than later. Emetophobia is not an easy thing to treat, and it is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly disruptive. It impacts their health, their growth, all that kind of stuff. So if you've got a kid who's beginning to change their world a lot and not eating and talking about this a lot, this would be one of those situations where I would say, you know what? Don't wait too long to get help with this. Now, of course, you want to get help from somebody who knows what they're doing. So most therapists who specialize in anxiety and or OCD are going to know how to treat emetophobia because the treatment protocol is very similar to what we do with OCD. So get expert help. Find somebody who really knows what they're doing with this. One of the things that it is often mistaken for is a fear of germs. So you start talking about, oh, it's germophobia because you're seeing the child wash their hands all the time, or they're very particular about what foods they're going to eat, or they're looking at expiration dates. And with a little bit of questioning and a little bit of investigation, you find that it's really not germs because they don't care about fevers. They don't care about getting a cold. They don't care about getting strep throat. They care about vomiting. So they're looking to see whether or not they're going to get a stomach illness. That's what they're paying attention to. Similar presentation, but it's just not as broad. They're very focused on this vomiting thing. So the first thing is you want to get some help. Don't delay with this. The second thing, as always, is that you want to pull back or pay attention to all of the things that you're doing, all of the behaviors that the family might be doing in order to accommodate this. So parents will limit what foods they serve. They'll take a lot of precautions in terms of making sure that the child isn't in a situation where there might be somebody else that throws up. I had one girl who ran on the cross-country team, and she got the whole cross-country team to surround her at the end of a race so that she didn't see anybody else throw up. She also wouldn't push herself during a race because that might have resulted in her throwing up. The coach thought that he was really doing a favor for this middle schooler. He was actually helping the disorder get stronger. So you want to look at the ways in which you're accommodating. The problem is, as I said, is that you want your child to eat. And so we accommodate in this way because we're worried about it. That tends to backfire because the more you accommodate, of course, the worse the disorder gets and the smaller their life gets and the smaller their food choices get. So you want to pay attention to how many things you do in service to the emetophobia. The other thing you really want to pay attention to is how much you as a family avoid even talking about this. So sometimes families have rules where they're not allowed to say barf. They're not allowed to say vomit. They're not allowed to say the word sick. Sometimes families say we're not allowed to even talk about tummy aches. And the whole family gets recruited into this cult in which we're not going to talk about it. So we want to normalize the fact that people throw up, and the likelihood of somebody throwing up during their life is pretty high. Not too many people get through life without throwing up, and it is unpleasant. But the issue is, you and I, Ed, we don't go through our lives thinking about throwing up all the time. we know that it could happen. And there are times when certain precautions are absolutely called for. Like if you were going to come over to my house and you were like, Lynn, we have the neurovirus, I'd be like, stay the F away. So there are things that we do, but you and I don't go through our lives on a daily basis checking to see whether or not today is the day that we're going to throw up. We are not in the throw up prevention business.
And we also understand that if we do happen to throw up, it's not the end of the world. It's unpleasant. And even if someone was aware that we were doing it, they would probably say, I've been there.
Right. We've all been there, right? We've all been on the bathroom floor thinking like, oh, this is the most comfortable place. Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly right. Because remember that what all anxiety disorders do is promote something to an emergency that's not an emergency. So throwing up is unpleasant, but in the normal course of having a stomach bug, it's not an emergency.
So a corollary to what you were saying about the family declining to even speak that which shall not be named, that would be the opposite of the front loading that you talk about, and the value of, if you have a child who's struggling with this, being very open about it and talking about it in advance, probably not on the way to school in the car if the child is concerned about vomiting at school.
Right. And what you want to do is you want to talk about it again, not so much in the context of vomiting, because what often happens is there's conversation after conversation about, if you throw up, you'll be okay. And everybody throws up. And this food didn't make you throw up. And I don't know why you stopped eating macaroni and cheese, because that's never made you vomit. And it makes no sense that you won't wear your pink t-shirt, because that has nothing to do with blah, 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 blah. So there's all this kind of content talk about throwing up and vomiting and food and blah, blah, blah. And what you really want to do is you want to say, this is a story that your brain is telling you. And remember, whenever somebody's afraid of something, they're overestimating the problem and underestimating their resources to deal with it. So you really want to normalize that this is a thing that human beings go through. And you want to put it in the context of, this is how anxiety makes things into an emergency. This is how anxiety makes this a problem that you can't handle. This is how anxiety makes something so big and so powerful that you rearrange your life in order to avoid it. And you can give examples of kids. And I've talked about this before. One of the tricks of the trade is to give examples of the way that people do this, but not in your content. So in other words, you might say, remember we had that cousin who was so afraid of dogs, and we have dogs. We've got 3 dogs in our house and we love dogs. Remember our cousin that was afraid of dogs? And how did he make dogs an emergency? And what did everybody do to make sure that he didn't see dogs? And remember, we couldn't even talk about dogs, and you guys wanted to watch that movie that had a dog in it, and we weren't allowed to watch that movie because if he saw a dog, he would freak out. That's what happens with you and vomit. So with cousin Freddie, it was dogs, but with you, same thing. And what we want families to do is we want families to normalize that vomiting happens, and also really talk about the process of, how does this story take over? And then families really have to pull back on those safety behaviors. But kids have to understand what this is about. They have to understand the rationale. That's the front loading. That we aren't going to let this fear get in the way of who you are, what you want to do. Now, in this question that this mom is asking, she's got this little girl, 11-year-old, going to camp. And this girl is in therapy, doing exposure. Here's the question that I would ask. Does this 11-year-old know how exposure is supposed to work? And are the exposures that she's doing things that she comes up with her therapist, that she's sort of buying in? Because if we can convey to this 11-year-old that her worry, her fear of vomiting, let's name it Vincent. Vincent is making up a story. Vincent is telling her she can't handle something, and Vincent is demanding that she change her life in order to meet his demands. How are we going to prove to Vincent that she, as an 11-year-old, can handle more than Vincent thinks? One of the things with emetophobia, which, again, this is tough to treat. this is a big one, is that exposure therapy, which definitely works, right? Exposure therapy, we're going to do the opposite of what the disorder demands. You have to have some buy-in with the kid. And one of the mistakes I think people make with emetophobia is that they move too fast with the exposure or they push too much with the exposure. And again, this is one of those exceptions. I am all for putting the pedal to the metal. I think that a lot of therapists move way too slowly with the exposure. If we were talking about bedtime or we were talking about going to school, they move in these little teeny tiny steps. But with emetophobia, the research shows that people, adults, are not at all interested in doing exposure when they start treatment. Their goal is to not throw up. That's the goal. And if you push too hard, you're not going to get any buy-in and you're going to get a lot of resistance. So with this girl, if I were talking to her, this 11-year-old girl, I would say, how can we experiment at camp? Little by little, how can we experiment at camp of you trying to eat something? I had a client recently who had a real fear of throwing up, and she wasn't eating at all at school. When she got home, she was starving and she would eat. She would have like a full lunch and a full dinner at home, but at school, she wasn't going to do it. She was in high school. I asked her, what could you put in your lunchbox that you would feel like you might be able to experiment a little bit with?
And she said, no one in high school carries a lunchbox, Lynn.
Is that true?
A lunchbox?
I loved my Partridge Family lunchbox. All right. I'm an old lady. Okay. So what would they say? Like their backpack? Like where do they put their lunch?
I think so. Probably. We'll go there.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Ed. You're very handy in this regard. And it was saltines. That's what she was willing to bring to school, saltines. And then little by little, she started adding more. And then where it got to is that she was packing her own lunch and she was putting things in her lunch, adding more things, and then eating those things at lunch. And she's done really, really well. So that's really what you want to think about with this. And the other thing too we know is that the more panicked the parents get, the more worried they are, the more that they talk about it, the more they accommodate it, the worse things get, or at least we don't make any progress. It's really about just saying like, yeah, this is how this thing works. We're going to pull back the safety behaviors. Let's do some exposure. Some people do exposure. Some therapists do exposure where they have kids watch videos of people vomiting.
Really?
Yeah. They make like a jar of vomit. So they'll put in, you guys all can't see, but Ed just made this horrible face. They'll put in like oatmeal and peas and carrots and they'll mix it all up. And then they have kids put it in their mouth and then spit it into the toilet. That's one of the things that they do. Now, I will tell you, I have never done that in all my years of treating anxiety disorders, but maybe some kids would be up for that.
What would be the rationale of a therapist having a child do that? What would be the intent or the hope?
The intent is to normalize vomiting. And so you're going through the motions of having something gross in your mouth and spitting it into the toilet. So food is coming out of your mouth. It's making the sound of going into the toilet. You're seeing it in the toilet. I haven't done it. And maybe it's one of the more effective things that I don't know.
The children that you've treated with this, is it more that physical discomfort that they fear or the social embarrassment of perhaps vomiting in front of their peers?
It's about 50-50, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing too, though, that's interesting about this is that these kids, because vomit happens, these kids do get stomach bugs. And the panic that they experience is really in anticipation of the vomiting. So you've had that. The last time I had a stomach bug, I knew it was coming like 2 hours before because I've been in my body for a long time. I'm like, crap. And it's that anticipation. So anytime they feel any kind of nausea or any kind of tummy distress, they start anticipating it. Many, many times, more times than not, when kids get a stomach bug that have this fear of vomiting, they actually do okay. And then after the fact, and the parents are like, oh my gosh, yay, they did it. We're going to get through this. That doesn't last. Remember, anxiety is amnesic to your successes. Once they're in the process of vomiting and throwing up, they do okay. It's very interesting. It's a lot of the anticipation. It's the storytelling. It's the hypervigilance about their body. And so it's helping kids to understand that if they throw up, it will be uncomfortable, They will not like it, but they can handle it. And talking to them about the amount of time that they're spending preparing for something that happens pretty infrequently. Yeah. So it's all of that anticipation, all the safety behaviors, all the accommodations that make it so intractable.
Great. Well, we'll take another quick break and be right back.
Mochi Health is a long-term weight loss solution personalized to fit your unique needs and goals. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who are on a mission to listen. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medications at an affordable, set price and get them delivered to their home each month. No insurance required, FSA and HSA accepted. With 24/7 customer service available, Mochi Health is here to partner with you on your journey to a healthier life. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com.
So I work with families all the time that are just trying to manage their schedules, just trying to figure out who needs to be where, when. The Skylight Calendar is here to keep your family organized. It's beautifully designed. It's got a digital display that syncs with your existing calendars. You can track events, appointments, reminders in one easy-to-see place. If your brain is already at full capacity with to-dos and errands and birthdays and dinner plans and practices and all that kind of stuff, the Skylight Calendar handles the rest. So you can focus on the more important things. It is either available in a 10 or a 15-inch HD touchscreen. With the free Skylight Companion app, you can add or update events and lists and do more on the go. Your happiness is Skylight's happiness. So if in 120 days you're not 100% thrilled with your purchase, you can return it for a full refund, no questions asked. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/fluster. Go to skylightcal.com/fluster for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/fluster. Do you want to make sure that the food you're feeding your family is nutritious? You do. Wild Alaskan Company is the best way to get wild-caught, perfectly proportioned, nutrient-dense seafood delivered directly to your door. You haven't tasted fish this good. When I got my first box from the Wild Alaskan Company, I opened it up. Here are all of these amazing portioned servings of salmon, halibut. I actually just cooked the salmon with a little bit of salt and pepper and then maybe a little bit of soy sauce. It was fantastic. My husband and I loved it. It's 100% wild caught, never farmed. This means there are no antibiotics, GMOs, additives, just clean, real fish that support healthy oceans. It is absolutely delicious because it is frozen fresh off the boat to lock in taste, texture, and nutrients like omega-3s. Your membership delivers flexible shipments, expert tips, and truly feel-good seafood. Try it risk-free. There's a 100% money-back guarantee. If you're not completely satisfied with your first box, Wild Alaskan Company will give you a full refund. No questions asked, no risk, just high-quality seafood. Not all fish are the same. Get seafood you can trust. Go to wildalaskan.com/fluster for $35 off your first box of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/fluster for $35 off your first order. Thanks to Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so now back to the show.
We're talking about emetophobia.
Yeah.
And wanted to ask you, is there value if you have a child who has this condition? Is there value in talking about how actually physiologically vomiting can be very helpful and is something that the body does naturally to aid itself in many situations. Is that getting too in the weeds of the content?
Well, oftentimes when there is some rationale. So, we were talking about this little girl getting on the plane and saying, I will be safe. I will be safe. There is a place for giving information that is helpful. To say you've got somebody who's really afraid of flying and you say, look, just by the way, the odds of the plane crashing are a lot lower than the odds of the car crashing. What I would do with that is I would offer that information maybe just once. Say you had a kid that was afraid of vampires. I would say, okay, so just for the record, there's no such thing as vampires. Just tuck that away, right? Important piece of information. Now let's talk about the story that you're telling. So you might say, okay, so just for the record, vomiting is often the way that the body gets rid of things that it needs to get rid of. There's a lot of reasons that people throw up, but it can be a helpful thing. And it's something that human beings do and animals do. So just for the record, we know that it's a natural process. Just put that over there for now. So I might throw that out there, but I wouldn't belabor that point. And I think that one of the things that we want to stay away from when we're helping kids with any fear, including this one, is to try and really address it from a rational point of view. So we throw in those rational pieces of information as sort of like, by the way, and then we get back to the story that it's telling. If you have a kid that's afraid of blood draws, we can tell them over and over and over again how important it is that we be able, how cool it is that we can take your blood and look at it. We can give them that information once, but it's not going to undo this irrational storytelling. So we always have to remember that this is an irrational fear, and coming at it with a lot of rational information. Cognitive behavioral therapy, there's very often this technique that's used as what's the evidence to support that belief? And I just don't do that anymore because that pulls us into the rational, and a lot of these fears are not rational. But it's a good thing to throw in for sure. Yeah. It's like fevers. We get a fever because that's our body heating itself up in order to fight the infection. There's a lot of things that our bodies do that actually are pretty amazing at helping us when things go awry. So I would throw it out there, maybe give a few other examples like a fever or a blister or something like that, but I wouldn't get stuck there.
I would also give a shout out to a great friend of the podcast, which is the vanilla ice cream face.
Yes, that's right.
If your child is obviously, because it's an emotional issue for the reasons you stated earlier, maybe the pediatrician has been somewhat firm that weight gain needs to take place, to have that vanilla ice cream calm manner when discussing it with your child is hugely important.
Yeah, because the research is so very clear that the parent's level of discomfort, the parent's level of concern, we talked about this with pain, is that kids will be impacted by their pain, not by their pain, but by the parent's perception or the parents talking about the pain. The other thing too, it reminds me is that I've had a lot of parents that I've talked to and kids have had this trouble. And not surprisingly, the parents have this same fear. So when there is a stomach bug in the house, the parent is freaking out. And that, of course, just raises the stakes for everybody. The same rules apply. The same processes apply. But the key thing, I think, is to really get buy-in from the child. The hardest hump to get over is the goal of the child is to not throw up. Unless you shift that, unless you come up with a different goal, you're not going to get anywhere. And what the goal is the goal is to not have Vincent, the anxiety monster, not have the emetophobia get in the way of life. And I've said to kids, if we could prevent you from throwing up and you didn't have to pay a price, I'd be all in. But what we want to focus on is not how much vomit impairs your life, because actually it's not very much. We vomit every once in a while, the numbers that we would add up, the minutes. It's not that vomit impairs your life. It's how much the anxiety about vomiting is impairing your life.
Limiting your life and shrinking your world.
Yeah. And that's what anxiety does, because the goal is to not have the experience. So pick anything. If you are afraid of clouds, if you are afraid of germs, if you are afraid of people, if you are afraid of dogs, if you are afraid of bees, the list is endless. If the goal is to avoid, then your world gets smaller, of course.
Are you treating a lot of people who are afraid of clouds?
Yeah, that's my specialty, actually. Yeah, I'm a cloud phobia specialist. I have had a few over the years. They're afraid of thunderstorms, really.
Wow.
And so they see a cloud as a precursor to a thunderstorm. I did have a kid who was afraid of the sun.
That's a tough one.
That was a really tough one. And it was because, I'll tell you, so this was an anxious family. They ran anxious and he had to take some sort of medication. I forget what, but like maybe amoxicillin or something. One of the things on the label said, avoid sunlight. And boy, that kid, just remember, like the content doesn't matter. That anxiety gremlin is just like hanging out saying, what can I grab onto? And it really got a hold of that. Yeah. And then one more thing as I think of this, because I meant to say this before, stay away from over-the-counter medications to treat tummy stuff. That is always the case. There's a medication called Zofran, which is an anti-nausea medication that kids get when they get chemotherapy or something like that. And very often, much to my dismay, kids who have emetophobia will get a prescription for Zofran. And that is going in the wrong direction. So being able to address this as a fear of something and not as a tummy problem is really, really helpful. But again, get on this early. You can try and do it yourself at first when you see it. But one of the things that I see happens a lot is that parents wait a really long time before they address this, and it can get pretty intractable. So if you're seeing this at age 6, 7, 8, jump on it. Don't delay with this thing. And it's a tricky one for sure. I had a woman come to see me and the reason she wanted to deal with this was because she wanted to have a kid. And she was so worried about morning sickness that she was considering getting her tubes tied so that she could prevent becoming pregnant. And it wasn't that she didn't want a baby. It was that she didn't want to throw up. So it really can grab on for sure. Yeah. And talk about barf a lot.
Talk about it a lot?
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you have a kid who you're dealing with this, like you make up a silly song, like vomit, vomit, vomit. You want to normalize it. You want to make it silly. You want to step into it. You want to really use all of the principles that I've talked about to make this about the power of the fear, not the power of the vomit. Yeah. Okay, Ed, can I just say, I want to put a little plug in because I've got some workshops coming up in September. I've been advertising it, but there's a parenting webinar in September that is for parents of teens that are anxious and depressed. And then I've got 2 live in-person clinical school trainings, elementary school and high school and middle school. All of that information is on my Instagram bio. I'm going to put the links up on my website, but I just want people to know that those programs are going to happen in September. And they're actually packed with information. And generally, we have a pretty good time, even though we're talking about things like barf.
And are those for parents or professionals or both?
The parent webinar is definitely for parents, of course. The 2 in-person trainings, it's funny because I was thinking about this. I used to really be a little bit like, this is just for professionals. But I sort of was thinking about that. And I was like, if you're a parent struggling this and you want to come and hear me talk about it for 6 hours, come on. So anybody's welcome, really. It's just got a lot of information that you probably would benefit from if you're struggling. It's definitely for clinicians. It's definitely for therapists, definitely for school personnel. But if you're a parent and you want some information or a grandparent, come on and I'll fill you up with good stuff.
Great.
Speaking of exposure therapy, by the way, do you know the show The Pit? Have you heard about the show The Pit?
I've heard of it. I know that Noah Wyle is the star, but I don't know more than that.
Yeah. And Noah Wyle, he's probably like about our age because he was on ER forever and ever. And he really is like delightful and charming and handsome. But it is emergency, like talk about exposure for those of us who are a little wiggy about that stuff. Exposure therapy for me. It's very well done. The characters are great and everything, but holy crap. Ugh. Every once in a while, I have to hit the little 10-second forward button.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, but I feel like I'm doing good work. So you might give it a try.
You say that instantly. I'm like, I don't know. I might stick with Welcome to Wrexham.
Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
You meal prep, you check ingredients. So why not do the same for your dog? If your pup has a sensitive tummy, or you're just done with mystery kibble, Ollie's got you. Fresh human-grade meals made just for your dog, delivered to your door. No fillers, no weird stuff, just real food that helps them feel their best. Go to ollie.com/pup60 and use code PUP60 for 60% off. Your best friend deserves it.